Welcome the chosen ones. When wicked hands delay what is properly yours, they do more than simply steal money. They also initiate heaven's inquiry. Allow it to settle for a second. What if I told you that what you thought was a delay was really a spiritual crime scene disguised? What if your missed paycheck, blocked promotion, or mysterious money drought was not the result of poor luck, but rather an organized, purposeful behind-the-scenes operation? Yes, fingerprints and security video were collected throughout this operation. Here's something most folks don't know. According to whistleblowers and economic experts, up to % of financial injustices go undetected, not because they do not occur, but because they have been acceptable. But here's a twist. When it occurs to a selected one, it isn't concealed. It becomes a broadcast. You see, your abundance was not only about you. It was related to certain areas, timeline lines, and testimony. And that is precisely why they attempted to postpone it. Because your payment would have shown their weakness. Instead, they caused delays, bogus reports, and pending status updates. And then they instructed you to be patient, as if your heavenly inheritance weren't in their sticky hands. But now, the same people who corrupted the system are sweating bullets because heavenly courts and worldly authorities have been notified. And let's be honest, they didn't only screw with your money. They purged their karma account. So take a seat. Choose one, because at the conclusion of this film, you'll understand why the delay was not a rejection. There was proof in paradise. Oh goodness, charges are already being pressed. Let's get to it. First and foremost, they purposefully turned your blessing into a war. They did more than simply postpone your payment. They turned it into a weapon. This was not a straightforward example of processing problems or unforeseen setbacks. These folks understood precisely what they were doing. They sensed a gift heading your way. They realized what it represented. And they purposely interfered because they couldn't bear the thought of you getting something they couldn't control. That's not merely a delay. This is spiritual sabotage camouflaged as red tape. They were not just seeking to buy time. They were attempting to shatter your spirit while seeming to be following procedure. They acted foolish in front of you while making advances behind closed doors. They saw your riches as a challenge to their own ego because they understood something the rest of the world didn't. You are not average. And if someone like you had received funding, support, and empowerment, it would have altered everything. That would have shown how ineffective their mechanisms are when divine favor is involved. As a result, they erected barriers that seemed to follow procedure. They rewrote deadlines. They waited on approvals. They misplaced items. But none of this was accidental. It was all about conveying a single message. We control whether or not you are blessed. They attempted to make you reliant on their mood swings. They wanted you to believe that your miracle required their consent. But that's where they went wrong, since what they were messing with was more than simply papers. This was a wonderful trade. It had a spiritual signature. And by getting involved, they were doing more than merely postponing money. They were infringing on hallowed territory. They believed they were being slick. They figured they could postpone your payoff and you'd simply fold, perhaps even go quiet. However, they knew how heavenly pressure worked. Because while they were delayed, you were growing. You were improving in clarity, spiritual authority, and insight. And you're no longer simply waiting for a payment. You know why it was delayed and who was behind it, but they didn't realize God was watching the entire affair. Every manipulation, delay technique, and blunder will be reviewed again next week. What they call delay, heaven calls proof. And the upcoming compensation is more than simply a release. It is a public corrective. Second, they utilized delay as psychological warfare. This delay was more than simply holding back money. It was psychological warfare from the beginning. They were aware that if they could delay the payment for long enough, it may have far-reaching consequences beyond your financial account. It could wear on your thoughts. They wanted to see you squirm, question everything, and begin questioning yourself. They did not only wish to slow you down monetarily, they intended to upset you psychologically and emotionally. That's where the actual game was played. They understood precisely how important that payoff was to you. It was more than simply the money. It signified years of prayer, obedience, battle, and silent suffering. So, by postponing it, they hoped you'd begin to believe that none of it mattered, that you'd made a mistake, that God had forgotten about you, or that you were just too optimistic. That kind of internal conflict is precisely what they were banking on. They intended to poison your beliefs without ever affecting your body. The worst part? They did it with a grin. They said you should be patient. Wait your turn. Trust in the process. Meanwhile, they were acting as gatekeepers behind the scenes, actively pulling threads to keep what was yours out of reach while appearing to be unaware of what was going on. That is gaslighting on a whole other level. And the purpose was always the same: to unsettle your identity and make you doubt if you were really selected at all. But here's a twist. They didn't realize you were designed to handle pressure. You didn't just wait. You evolved in every moment. They postponed it. They were unintentionally preparing you to become brighter, stronger, and spiritually unshakable while calculating how to smash you with silence. They unintentionally developed someone who can recognize trickery from a mile away. You revealed knowledge that they cannot erase. And now, the same pressure that they used to put on you is bearing down on them, since the delay showed not just your tenacity, but also their character. The same mental games they used to play are now unraveling in front of authorities they never imagined would care. But they care now, and so does heaven. What they used to destabilize you is now the exact proof that will bring them down. Third, the delay revealed the shadow economy that operates behind closed doors. They didn't just hold your payment. They moved it around so that money, opportunity, inheritance, or divine providence would not go unnoticed. It was diverted, redirected, and repurposed in the background. People you'd never met benefited from something with your name on it. What was designed to support your next chapter was instead used to fuel their lifestyle. They're padding their accounts and stuffing their wallets. The weird aspect is that they rationalized it to themselves. They convinced themselves you wouldn't miss it, you didn't really need it, and you'd have it later, maybe. However, spiritually speaking, they hijacked a holy transaction. They turned your blessing into a business. There is a spiritual economy that most people do not discuss. An unseen system in which energy favors time and supply flows in accordance with divine will. And when someone interferes with it, willfully blocking or redirecting what God sent, they are not just stealing, but also violating something holy. This is precisely what happened to you. You may have felt it without knowing how to express it. The impression of delay that made no sense. The resistance. You couldn't explain the nagging suspicion that someone had a role in your commitment. You were not insane. You were discerning. Your spirit caught up on something your eyes couldn't establish, since they weren't simply postponing. They were exchanging what belonged to you. But this is what changes everything. Spiritual accounts do not forget. They do not lose track. Every unlawful transaction is now being brought to light. They took advantage of your quiet, patience, and confidence. They are now being researched both spiritually and naturally. You were not ignored. You were recorded. The books of heaven are open. And the payoff? It isn't returning in the same way it departed. It will return with interest receipts and divine justice attached. They didn't just postpone your payment. They planned a whole operation around what they believed they had stolen from you. And now the enterprise is failing. One secret at a time. Number 4. Your prosperity was not delayed. It was detoured for safety. They were celebrating a delay that was never within their control. They interpreted quiet for failure and stillness for defeat. They reasoned that the payoff did not arrive when anticipated. They'd somehow halted it. But what they didn't realize was that heaven doesn't function on their timetable and is certainly not within their control. The payment was not refused. It was detoured because God foresaw what was about to taint it. You were not being penalized. You were being safeguarded. If that blessing had arrived at the right time, it would have been surrounded by vultures, bogus friends, leeches, manipulators, and spiritual parasites, all waiting to latch onto your breakthrough, as if they had earned it. However, God diverted the blessing, such that by the time it came, the incorrect individuals had already talked and justified themselves. What seemed to be a bottleneck was in fact heavenly buffering, a spiritual quarantine of your heritage. And it's larger than you realize. This was not simply about protecting your money. This was about preserving your name, destiny, and legacy. There were individuals who would have sought to take credit for what God had given you. Others would have sought to taint, trap, or distort it to their advantage. So heaven delayed the transaction to cleanse the environment before handing it over to you. Now that the dust has cleared and the masks have been removed, your reward is being returned. But this time, with interest. Not just economical, but also spiritual and emotional. You're reclaiming everything they attempted to take, but doubled. This is the part that hurts for them. It arrives at a time when they will be unable to access, influence, or profit from it. So, while they were joking about the delay, they had no idea they had been shut out of the harvest. God was never late. He was being exact. And when it descends this time, it will do more than simply bless you. It will vindicate you. Number 5 has divine justice tied to it. They delayed you publicly so that they could control the story in private. They did not just postpone your reimbursement to inconvenience you. They did it to manipulate how others saw you. In their views, if they could postpone your breakthrough for long enough, they could construct the narrative around you. They wanted everyone to assume you were ordinary, suffering, and undeserving, and that the favor you mentioned was just a figment of your mind, that your faith was delusional. Because if the resources appeared when they did, people would be forced to think you were really selected. And this scared them. They were not frightened of your money. They were worried about your confirmation. Because plenty in the hands of a properly anointed individual threatens the existing quo. It demonstrates the power of divine timing. It reveals mechanisms that favor manipulation while overlooking integrity. If you had gotten what was rightly yours on time, their hold on the story would have crumbled. So they decided to postpone the blessing just long enough to have people doubt your calling. They talked of your name with veiled scorn, calling you too spiritual, too ambitious, delusional, or unprepared. They attempted to portray your struggle as proof that God was not with you, while in reality, they were trying hard to bury evidence of who you are. They understood your reward would influence how people treated, listened to, and followed you, and they couldn't afford that kind of exposure. But they forgot that the truth does not perish. The delay may have hushed the announcement, but it did not halt the arrival. You were not disqualified. You were concealed for a season, shielded while the whole drama unfolded. And now that the truth has out and the payoff can no longer be withheld, the same individuals who controlled the narrative will have to sit and watch as the true tale unfolds publicly. They buried the evidence, but God made the file transitory. And now, the evidence of your calling, perseverance, and divine entitlement to plenty is going to speak louder than any untruth ever said. Number 6, your delay demonstrated their reliance on your blessing. They made it seem as if you were the one waiting, as if you were the one who needed to be patient, modest, and thankful for crumbs. But, in truth, they were living off of what was intended for you. Your delay wasn't due to spiritual warfare or poor timing. It was about supply and demand. You were the supplier. They were unwelcome customers. They camouflaged thievery as order, acting as if they were the guardians to your fate, while in reality, they were parasites feasting on your unclaimed benefits. They didn't just steal your prize. They rerouted it to their own systems. Resources intended to empower you were secretly utilized to empower others. Time, attention, opportunities. Even money you should have gotten was siphoned away to pay individuals, programs, or organizations who did not share your vision but sorely need your energy. You unintentionally funded your own tyranny. And the worst part? A few of them were aware of it. They understood precisely what they were doing. That's why you were kept in the dark. Because if you ever learned how strong your peace was, their fictitious kingdom would shatter instantly. They were exploiting what was yours to perpetuate something that should not have been in the first place. They obtained that job, got promoted, secured that contract, and signed that influence. They carried. Many of them were sustained by a stolen blessing. Your blessing. And they assumed you would never find out. But now you are aware. You've awoken and linked the dots. And the spiritual structure that formerly depended on your ignorance is collapsing. You've reclaimed your power. You have recovered your value. And the instant you did, every structure that relied on your quiet started to tremble. This was never about whether you were prepared. It was about whether they could continue to milk your blessing while keeping you unaware of it. However, now that the curtain has been broken, they are unable to consume food that is not their own. The flow has been halted. The faucet has closed. And what is rightly yours is finding its way back, with nothing to drain it from again. Number 7. Heaven initiated a heavenly lawsuit on your behalf. You assumed it went undetected. Delays, bogus reports, and strange blunders continued to put your blessings out of grasp. You thought it was simply part of life, lousy timing, and bureaucracy doing its job. But in the spirit world, a case was being built every time they purposefully hindered your breakthrough, every time they deliberately impeded what was promised to you. Heaven took calm, precise notes, not missing a single detail. Divine justice does not allow for overlooked details. Heaven does not work in the same way as corrupted systems do below. There are no forgotten papers, missing approvals, or prejudiced bureaucrats who turn a blind eye. Every delay was noted in the record. Every excuse became proof. And when it reached the point of spiritual injustice, Heaven filed a lawsuit on your behalf. You had no idea you had legal counsel in the spirit when you were attempting to remain calm, pray, and cope with the strain. Angels were collecting documents. There were witnesses and monitoring. There was incontrovertible evidence that you had been harmed, not only financially, but morally and spiritually. They concealed anything from you while seeming to be clean. Now the court of heaven is in session, and the judge is not easily bought or influenced. God is not just observing. He is governing. The ruling being given down is about more than simply release. It is about reversal. Everything they believed they had locked up forever is going to be reopened. Everything they had thought would remain buried is being unearthed. Every untruth they used to excuse the delay is now being challenged by heavenly authority. And what's next? It's not simply about restoration. It is legal restitution in the spirit. The type of release that clears your name, restores your time, and reclaims what they said you'd never touch. You are not getting back what you lost. You're getting what was denied, plus heavenly retribution for the years of sabotage. They believed they had gotten away with it, but they forgot. The kingdom of heaven does not commit injustice. Silently, it saves, it battles, it wins. Number 8. Your delay was recorded as surveillance film in the spirit world. They honestly felt they had gotten away with it. All the backdoor chats, whispered agreements, and covert schemes to thwart your blessing. They assumed that was off the record, hidden and undetected. They didn't understand, however, that nothing done in the dark can escape the light of the spirit world. While they moved in secret, heaven was filming everything. Every delay, every twisted consequence, every lie sent via an email or uttered over the phone was turned into magical surveillance film. This was not only a spiritual delay. This was heavenly documentation. They meant that sabotage had become their own undoing. They caused the delay in the hope that it would give them time and tear you down gradually and softly. However, they attempted to extend the deadline at every opportunity. They were leaving a digital and spiritual footprint they cannot erase. And now, the delay they created has become the video God is replaying in real time. Heaven has the receipts, and this is not metaphorical. It is lawful. They didn't just delay you. They incriminated themselves. The spiritual dimension doesn't just recall it. Archives. They did these things. I hope you never see. God saw them all. Even when you were oblivious, weary, or bewildered, the monitoring continued. And now it's being played out in front of celestial witnesses. The trap they have laid for you. It has become a trap of exposure for them. The delay was their own admission, caught in high definition. Not just a mistake, not even negligence, but deliberate interference with a chosen one's divine inheritance. And that is not something heaven tolerates. Now the timing is divine. Now that playback has begun, there is no pause or editing. What is about to be revealed? You do not even need to defend yourself. The video speaks for you. God does not just restore. He reveals that what they tried to bury is now being broadcast by heaven. Your delay was not a denial. It represented evidence in motion, and judgment has entered the room. Number 9. What they concealed became their own curse. What they thought was just money was not just that. That payment carried spiritual significance. It was more than just a financial release. It was the release of grace, favor, and divine timing. It was sent with your name on it for a reason. It was intended to unlock something in your life. It was intended to heal, elevate, protect, and move you to the next level of your calling. But when they interfered with it, when they touched what was consecrated, they not only delayed your breakthrough, but they also invoked a curse upon themselves. Tampering with holy things comes with a price. They thought they were simply being petty, playing the system, and keeping you in your place. They didn't understand they'd intercepted anything precious. The reward was imbued with celestial force. Your energy, process, obedience, and pain. It was not just about the result. Everything was the voyage that made everything worthwhile. And when they attempted to control the process for their own gain or ego, they polluted their own hands with something they were not entitled to touch. So what they intended to hoard is now weighty and spiritually harmful. It is silently unraveling them. They're perplexed, panicked, and trapped in a circle of disaster. And they don't understand why everything are going apart. But you know what? It wasn't theirs to bear. The covering that was applied on the payments was not intended to protect them. It was created to protect you. And since they prevented you from receiving it, they also excluded themselves from its protection. They are now feeling the consequences of a stolen blessing, which is rotting in their hands. Meanwhile, you're rising since what's sanctified cannot be kept away indefinitely. God has a method of reversing pollution and restoring what is yours, pure and unmistakable. While they collapse under the weight of what they took, you are raised by the insight, strength, and judgment you earned in the process. What they suppressed did more than merely postpone your advancement. It turned against them, because trying to possess what God has allocated to someone else does not benefit you. It breaks you. And now they are learning the hard way. Number 10, they did not want you financed since you are uncontrollable. They understood from the start that if you gained access to what was legitimately yours, the game would alter. This was not about fairness. It was not about policy. It was not about having to wait your turn. It was all about power and control. They would lose control over you once you were sponsored. You would not need their approval. You would not have to put up with their manipulative behavior. You would not need to beg for anything. You'd stroll in a silent sovereignty that terrified insecure people. You would not be easy to guilt trip. You'd cease relying on mechanisms designed to keep you in survival mode. So they used the delay to keep you on a leash. They wanted you to be distracted by bills, psychologically drained by scarcity, and emotionally exhausted by waiting. That way, you'd be too fatigued to see what was actually going on behind the curtain. Despite all of this, you became stronger. You did not collapse. You learned. You sharpened. You became strategic. And now their grasp is slipping, because everything they tried to repress has only grown inside of you. You were not intended to be governed. You were supposed to be launched. That is why they could not suspend the funds indefinitely, because even their delay had a heavenly end date. They dreaded autonomy. It has already come. They denied these resources. They are being published in ways that circumvent any system that attempts to act as a gatekeeper. Now they're watching in astonishment as the precise thing they dreaded happens. There is nothing they can do to impede the emergence of someone who does not require them, because control is ineffective in the face of divine timing. And your moment has finally arrived. A number. Their delay was designed to excuse their guilt later. They didn't just postpone your payment. They created a whole story around it to preserve their ego. They needed an excuse to block you. So they began persuading themselves and others that you weren't prepared, that you were not mature enough, that you were very passionate, dramatic, and unexpected. They saw your assertiveness as arrogance. Your sincerity implies irresponsibility. When none of it was true, they only doubled down more because accepting the truth would have included admitting their guilt. This delay was motivated by psychological self-preservation, not merely strategic considerations. They had to persuade themselves that keeping you back was vital, that they were acting in your best interests or the larger good. But, deep down, it had nothing to do with your preparation. It all sprang from their dread, fear of losing your freedom. Because if you ever properly asserted your authority with resources behind you, they would no longer be able to dominate the narrative. They would be unable to belittle your genius. You would ascend on your own terms, regardless of their approbation. That terrified them more than anything. So instead of confronting their fear, they projected it. They wanted you to seem unqualified so they could feel justified. They withheld what was yours in order to preserve their feeling of superiority. They never genuinely earned anything. The issue with lies is that they ultimately run out of space to breathe. And now, the reality is catching up quickly. The same folks who said you weren't ready are now being revealed as those who weren't ready for who you really are. You were never the unstable person. You were never an issue. You were changing, growing, and becoming. And while they were creating their narrative, you were developing your strength. Now, everything they asserted to explain the delay is collapsing under the weight of undisputed evidence. You were always qualified. You were always picked. You were always enough. And now that the truth is louder than any justification they have ever offered, they can no longer hide. You weren't prepared anymore since it was evident that you were just too strong to influence. And that's what they couldn't take. A number. The longer they held it, the more audible God's judgment became. The delay was not arbitrary. It was not forgotten. It was not lost in the bustle of paperwork or spiritual uncertainty. It was being piled. Every day, they held it. Every lie they uttered, each signature. They refused to sign all doors. They claimed they did not possess the key to God. Allow them to pile it up like dry wood, waiting for a blaze. Not to punish you, but to provide indisputable evidence that when your return was successful, no one else could claim credit. They believed they were in charge. They believed that the more they postponed it, the weaker you would become. But all they were actually doing was laying the groundwork for something explosive. Because the more they attempted to repress your release, the more powerful it became. And God's wrath is no longer a distant possibility. It's loud. It is disruptive. When people roll their eyes at your faith, it causes things to shift in ways they can't conceal, evade, or talk themselves out of. They laughed behind your back or dismissed your calling. Heaven was watching, not with wrath, but with plan. God wasn't hurrying to solve anything because he was preparing such an irrefutable exhibition that when it occurred, the same rooms who ridiculed you would be forced to remain mute. Nobody will be able to claim it was coincidental because no one will be able to explain it away. Luckily, your benediction comes with a signature. Only heaven could write. And now, the weight has become their vulnerability. Because when the fire strikes, the dry wood burns, and everything done in secret is revealed to the world. They did not postpone your payment. They provided God with additional fodder for your vindication. And now, when it appears, it won't just bless you. It will shake every building that attempted to keep you prisoner. Allow them to continue whispering if they still have the courage. Allow them to scurry to change the tale, because when this blessing comes, it will speak louder than any lie they have ever said about you. A number. The authorities keeping surveillance aren't simply ordinary people. There are individuals in positions of authority who now understand precisely what occurred. Paper trails have been revealed. Whistleblowers have spoken. Eyes that were previously blind to the manipulation and delay have abruptly opened. They aren't looking away this time. However, although human authorities are taking note, this is just half of the tale. The genuine probe began much before they were engaged. What happened to you sparked more than just legal curiosity. It triggered spiritual intelligence, the sort that sees through sealed papers, disguised agendas, and phony smiles, the kind that doesn't need search warrants because it already knows every secret whispered in every secret meeting. You weren't just being monitored by systems. You were being protected by forces that do not miss a thing. Heaven sent its messengers long ago. Angelic troops were dispatched. The moment your blessing was messed with, and you wondered whether anybody cared. Spiritual monitoring has already detected the interference. There is a higher court monitoring. And, unlike human systems, this one cannot be bought, persuaded, or delayed. Every missing email, every falsified rejection, and every delay technique disguised as procedure have all been intercepted. The cover-up is no longer a secret. This is a spiritual crime scene. You have been functioning under heavenly authority. That implies those who attempted to prevent your release are no longer dealing only with you. They are interacting with a higher authority. And that authority does not play politics. It does not shield the corrupt. It does not look the other way. It exposes. It corrects and restores with force. So, while natural authorities catch on, remember that divine justice has always been 10 steps ahead. You aren't merely being vindicated by worldly methods. Heaven has vindicated you. And every delay they believed they could get away with is now the very evidence heaven would utilize to completely overturn the case. The locks are cracking, doors are opening, and officials are watching. They now report directly to the throne number. They didn't simply postpone a dividend. They triggered a prophecy. They believed they were postponing a purchase. They had no idea they were activating a prophecy by withholding what had been divinely allotted to you. They did not halt your destiny. They lit it because selected ones do not just get benefits. They have amazing timing. And by interfering with its time, you do not delay God. You invite Him to respond. And this is precisely what they did. They were playing God with your life, name, and release, as if they had the power to choose when or if you would rise. They believed they had such power, yet in attempting to control the situation, they unleashed something much greater than themselves. Now, your breakthrough will not just seem as a favor. It will seem like divine revenge, since what was supposed to be a private blessing is now public, worldwide, and visible. They didn't just postpone your payment. They raised the platform from which your tale would be conveyed. And it won't arrive gently. It is coming with power, clarity, and an effect that will shock the whole system. What was supposed to be personal has become prophetic, because when others witness what occurs next, they will understand precisely what it means to not block a chosen one and walk away unharmed. Your restoration will serve as a warning shot to every corrupt system, deceitful leader, and counterfeit gatekeeper who believed they could postpone what God had planned. What was previously suppressed will now be amplified, and the release will do more than merely raise you. It will expose every lie they uttered, every shadow they hid behind, and every phony title they used to mask their fear of your mission. This isn't just about you anymore. Your name is associated with anything heaven is using to convey the message that no one, no system, no structure, and no human power has the authority to play God with a destiny they did not create. They did not postpone your benediction. They foresaw their own exposure. And now it's coming loud, unstoppable, and on time. They assumed they were playing a quiet game of delay. There are a few withheld signatures here. A few will return to utilize them. But they didn't realize that every delay, fib, and strategic obstruction was being documented in heaven's courts. What they believed was a wise decision turned out to be a spiritual confession. And the delay they created has now become indisputable proof, strengthening your case. You were not refused. You were preserved. You were not forgotten. You were being documented. You were not abandoned. You were being supported by powers much bigger than any earthly authority could grasp while they attempted to repress you. Heaven was assembling a case, piling every injustice as ammo for your release. And the judgment is not only coming, it is unfolding. Your payoff is no longer just the release of resources. It's a prophetic event, a public reckoning, and a divine declaration that no system, person, or manipulator has the authority to overturn what God has decreed. You're not just strolling into plenty. You're headed toward confirmation, closure, and the type of repair that speaks for itself. It was never simply about money. It was about movement, destiny, and exposing those who attempted to play God with a selected individual's life. And now that the curtain has been removed, everything they postponed is returning with heavenly speed. So, let this be the last reminder. They did not postpone your payment. They financed your prophecy. And what is coming now will go. There is no space for argument, no stage for falsehoods, and no shadow in which to conceal guilt. God is not just rewarding you. He's rewriting the record. Don't simply scroll away if this message spoke to you or verified something you've been seeing quietly. This isn't just content. Here it is. And if you're a chosen one going through divine delays, breakthroughs, and revelations, you're at the correct spot. Subscribe to the channels to ensure you never miss a word that is divinely inspired for your path. Like this video to show the algorithm that truth is still important and divine timing is real. Leave a comment below. Whether you've been delayed, restored, or vindicated, your testimony may drive someone else's breakthrough. Share this video with someone who has been spiritually sabotaged and is unaware of it. It might be the very moment they awaken. This community isn't simply expanding, it's awakened. Stay locked in. Maintain alignment. Stay ready. Your time isn't simply coming. It is already moving.